Hi, I'm Mohsen. In part 1 of this video series, I covered some major topics for Azure Storage Account Advanced Security. Please watch part 1 if you haven't already. In this part, I will continue discussing about important security configurations of Azure Storage Account. Access control is already discussed. I will continue with data loss prevention configuration or DLP, networking, logging and monitoring. We can organize the data loss prevention configuration of a storage account in 4 main sections. Enabling soft delete for blobs and containers, locking critical storage accounts, consume immutable blobs when it is required, backup. Let's go and see them in more details. You can enable soft delete for both blobs and containers and set how many days you want to keep deleted blobs and containers. Based on your company policy, it can be set from 7 days to 365 days. Please note to keep the permanent delete checkbox unchecked. You can create an Azure custom policy to enforce this. I will mention some useful security policies for a storage account at the end of this video. To answer one common question, enabling soft delete has no additional cost. However, you still will need to pay for active and inactive data in a storage account. It includes the deleted ones until the soft delete period gets expired for them. Lock critical storage accounts to prevent accidental or malicious deletion or configuration changes. There are 2 types of Azure Resource Manager resource locks: cannot delete and read-only lock. Cannot delete lock prevents users from deleting a storage account but permits reading and modifying its configuration. Read-only lock prevents users from deleting a storage account or modifying its configuration but permits reading the configuration. 2 important notes here. 1. Locking a storage account doesn't protect containers or blobs within that storage account from being deleted or overwritten. The next is when a read-only lock is applied to a storage account, the list keys operation is blocked for that storage account. So always analyze the impact on the business before applying this change. Store business critical data in immutable blobs based on business requirements. Configure legal hold and time-based retention policies to store blob data in a warm, write once, read many state. Blobs stored immutably can be read but cannot be modified or deleted for the duration of the retention interval. There are 2 types of locks: time-based retention policy and legal hold. Time-based retention policy has an expiry date, while legal hold must be removed manually by an authorized user. The scope can be container level or version level. Use tags when having a legal hold. It can be, for example, a case ID. As always, you should understand and analyze the business impact very carefully before the change. For example, suppose that a user creates a time-based retention policy with a retention interval of 5 years. An existing blob in that container, test1, was created 1 year ago. So the effective retention period for test1 is 4 years. When a new blob, test2, is uploaded to the container, the effective retention period for test2 is 5 years from the time of its creation. Another note for time-based retention policies is after the retention period has expired, object can be deleted but not overwritten. Be sure that you always have a regular and reliable backup of your data. You can use Azure Backup, but note that Azure Backup doesn't directly support queues and tables. You may use a custom solution such as exporting to the blobs. These custom solutions require manual setup and are not part of the Azure Backup's out-of-the-box offering. When planning a backup strategy, 3 critical considerations are: Data integrity and consistency. Ensure that your backups capture consistent data to avoid corruption or data loss during recovery. For databases or dynamic systems, consider application consistent backups, where data is in a usable state post-recovery, even during transactions or system operations. Recovery point objective RPO and recovery time objective RTO. RPO defines how much data loss is acceptable. For example, backups every 24 hours means up to 24 hours of potential data loss. RTO defines the acceptable downtime after a failure. Both metrics help shape the frequency and method of backups, for example, incremental or full backups, and the infrastructure to meet business needs. Security and compliance. Implement encryption for both data in transit and at rest to protect against unauthorized access. Regularly test backups and apply role-based access control (RBAC) to restrict backup management. In terms of networking, we should reduce the exposure of a storage account and limit them to the networks that the hosting client requiring access. Use private endpoint. A private endpoint assign a private IP address from your Azure Virtual Network VNet to the storage account. This prevents traffic from traversing the public internet. It secures all traffic between your VNet and the storage account over a private link. You can refer to Microsoft documentation for a step-by-step guide. To address a common mistake that I have seen in many organizations, if you are using private endpoints, be sure that you disable the public network access. Other important network security topics for storage accounts are: configure a storage account firewall to restrict access to only trusted networks. If you have to use VNet, limit access to specific IP addresses or ranges. You can also block access from all networks except those explicitly allowed. Ensure that only HTTPS or TLS encrypted connections are allowed, helping to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. Apply network security groups, NSGs, to control inbound and outbound traffic between your virtual networks and storage account. These rules help restrict access to only trusted sources and block unauthorized communications. Enable Defender for Storage account. Microsoft Defender for Storage provides an additional layer of security intelligence that detects unusual and potentially harmful attempts to access or exploit a storage account. It helps prevent the three major impacts on your data and workload. Detecting malicious file uploads. This feature is optional with additional cost. It prevents sensitive data exfiltration by sensitive data discovery, which is absolutely useful in large organizations. Additionally, it can integrate very well with Defender for Cloud CSPM and Microsoft Purview. Activity monitoring for preventing data corruption. Note that table and queues are not supported now. Enable logging for Azure Storage to track how requests to the service are authorized. Configure log alerts to evaluate resource logs at a set frequency and fire an alert based on the results. You might stream Azure Storage accounts diagnostic logs into your Microsoft Sentinel workspace, allowing you to continuously monitor activity in all of your instances and detect malicious activity in your organization. There are good documentation on Microsoft website. Here is the list of baseline security policies that can be used based on your business requirements. Disabling the blob anonymous access, enabling HTTPS only, Soft delete should be enabled for containers and blobs. Permanent delete should be disabled for blobs. A storage account should prevent shared key access. Custom policy to report the storage accounts that their keys have not rotated for more than 365 days for those storage accounts that enable the access key. Custom policy to be sure that public network access to storage accounts from all networks is set to disable. Let's summarize. We discussed about the structure of Azure Storage Account, which consists of containers, file shares, queues, and tables. We talked about the solution architecture and purpose of using a storage account, specifically not storing sensitive data unencrypted in a storage account, using Azure Key Vault when it applies, and benefiting from auto-sensitive data discovery of Defender for Cloud, specifically for large organizations. I mentioned uplifting storage account security by defining the security standards, guardrails, documentation, then understanding the current status, taking remediation action for existing storage accounts, enforcing policies to prevent deployment of non-compliance resources, improving the procedure and continuous monitoring. Important security configurations: first, access control, disabling anonymous access, and using Microsoft Intra RBAC, or if you are using SaaS, be sure that you rotate the keys regularly. For DLP or data loss prevention configurations, I mentioned enabling the soft delete for blobs and containers, locking critical storage accounts, consume immutable blobs when it's required, and backing up. On the networking side of that, I mentioned using private endpoints, enabling firewall virtual network rules, using HTTPS only, implementing network security groups, NSGs, and routing when using private endpoints or VNet. For logging and monitoring, I discussed enabling Defender for a storage account, track how requests are authorized, set up alerts in Azure Monitor, and sending logs to advanced SIEM and SOAR solutions. In this case, can be Azure Sentinel. Of course, we can do more, but the practicality of our security strategies is important. Our security strategies shouldn't cause business disruption or high costs without return of investment. In part 1 and part 2 of this video, I tried my best to discuss the practical advanced security for Azure storage accounts. You can tailor it based on your business requirements. Thank you.